So, the wise shall understand the study of Daniel, lesson 14, and we're going to talk about civil disobedience. That's been in the, this is going to be part 1 of 2, by the way, so we're going to have civil disobedience part 2. But civil disobedience of late has been in the news, both kinds, violent and peaceful demonstration. We're going to talk about civil disobedience that we find in the Scripture, and we're going to talk about a little bit about what has been happening throughout history in this regards, and let you come to your own conclusions as to what you should do as we get further and further into man's rebellion against God. Cyrus the Second and Darius the Mede. Daniel chapter 6, verses 1 to 10. And Cyrus the Second of Persia, who reigned from 559 to 530 BC, was the commander of the combined armies of the Medes and Persians. He was the son of King Cambyses I of Persia and Queen Mandan, daughter of King Astyages of the Medes. This marriage of King Cambyses I and Queen Mandan formed the alliance between the Medes and the Persians. So there was a marriage that put both the Medes and the Persians together. Now, Darius, assuming that he is Cyaxares II, Cyrus's uncle, was the king of the Medes at the time of the capture of Babylon by Cyrus in 539 BC. Now, he assumed the throne of the Babylonian portion of the Medo-Persian Empire. In fact, Cyrus divided this expanded kingdom into 20 provinces and appointed a governor over each. Darius was one such governor who ruled as if he was a sovereign king. So he probably was the chief governor of the Babylonian section of the empire there, of the Medo-Persian Empire that it became after they took over from Babylon. So I would say Darius then was probably the chief of the governors there. So upon Darius's death, 2 years later, so Darius didn't last more than a couple of years. And we're going to hear about Darius today a little bit, and next week as well. Now, upon Darius' death 2 years later, so he died 2 years after that, Cyrus, known as Cyrus the Great, and Cyrus the Second, assumed those duties in addition to his overall sovereignty over the Medo-Persian Empire. Now, to get an idea of the Medo-Persian Empire, take a look at some of the red arrows in this map that I'm showing you here. You can see Media. Do you see Media? Media. It's just right above Persia there. You can see Persia down there close to the Gulf there. And then over in the brownish area, or purple, I think it might be showing up as, you can see an arrow pointing up and towards Babylon, so you can get a perspective of the Medo-Persian Empire. All of this is the Medo-Persian Empire, by the way, because they took over what Babylon had conquered. And so therefore, and also down into Egypt, you see there, you also see Jerusalem there in a tiny area over there. So they still come under the, now when Babylonia lost their power, of course, Jerusalem then came under the under the leadership or the rulership of the Medo-Persian Empire. So all of these empires had an effect on the state, or well, I shouldn't say state, but the kingdom of Israel at that time. My clicker's not working, so. There it goes. Something popped up. Okay, and then Cyrus II and Darius the Mede, history, when you actually look at the history, history has a difficult time reconciling this Darius and has assumed that he did not exist, because really they can't figure him out. They can't find him. They can't really determine who he was. Now he came into Babylon. He ruled a couple of years, and then was taken over by Cyrus, as we discussed. So it may be that the biblical King Darius was actually Cyrus II. Excuse me if I don't know how to pronounce these words, but I'm from Kansas. And that Darius may be a common reference to rulers such as Pharaoh or Caesar. So that's a possibility there. Now, in this connection, it's interesting to note Darush, found on inscriptions, means Lord King. So it is possible that Darius was really a title rather than an actual name. So this is maybe why history can't really identify a king by the name of Darius. So just to let you know about that. But nevertheless, it is true what I'm telling you. However, his reign was short after the defeat of Babylon. Now, he is not to be confused with Darius the First or Darius the Great, who ruled Persia from 522 to 486 BC. So it was in the reign of Cyrus the Great that the proclamation to rebuild the Jerusalem temple was carried out. And we can take a look at Ezra on that. Ezra chapter 1 and verse 1. Now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and put it also in writing, saying, Thus saith King Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord God of heaven hath given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he hath charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is there among you of all his people? His God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of the Lord God of Israel. He is the God which is in Jerusalem. So Cyrus is recognizing the God of Israel. He also puts this proclamation in writing, which means it's binding. And so therefore, he is the king that God has referred to as being a servant. Cyrus is. And Cyrus II and Darius the Mede, Cyrus succeeded Darius probably about 537 BC and was known for the proclamation for the return of the Jews to their land. Cyrus died in 529 or 530 BC and was succeeded by his son Cambyses. So that's the story of Cyrus and Darius. I'm sure you all want to know all about that, right? So, interesting anyway. So let's move along. A jealous plot. A jealous plot. Daniel 6, verse 1. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes or satraps or governors or whatever you want to call them, which should be over the whole kingdom. And verse 2, and over these 3 presidents, they call them presidents in the King James here, of whom Daniel was first, that the princes or satraps might give accounts unto them, and the king should have no damage. According to historian Charles Rowland, the Babylonian portion of the expanded Medo-Persian kingdom was divided into 127 parts, or government divisions that were ruled by governors or princes called satraps. Now, Charles Rowland is an historian. Don't know what happened to those 7 other satraps, but I don't think it matters much because history sometimes gets it wrong. But certainly within the 120, the number is correct. And over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first, that the princes or satraps might give accounts unto them, and the king should have no damage. So according to historian, wait a minute, what did I do? Did I back that thing up? So according to historian Charles Rowland, the Babylonian portion of the expanded Medo-Persian kingdom was divided into 127 parts, or government divisions, that were ruled by governors or princes called satraps. Now, Daniel indicated the division was 120 parts. Now, under Darius, 3 principal ministers or presidents were set over the satraps. Now, Daniel was set in a position above all the rest. That's important to know, that Daniel was elevated above all the rest. Interestingly, in a previous lesson, we learned that Darius was most likely Gubaru, who was king, I love these names, Sarexis or Cereres, something, second of the Medes. In this regard, there is an ancient record, the annalistic table of Cyrus, that Gubaru appointed governors in Babylon. So historically, we know that the Bible is true. Governors were appointed in Babylon. In Daniel chapter 2, the Medo-Persian kingdom was the silver kingdom compared to the head of gold of the Babylonian kingdom, as we've seen in previous lessons. Babylonia was an absolute monarchy during the Babylonian Empire, while 120 governors administered the Babylonia of the Medo-Persian kingdom. So they set up a different type of government within that. They divided the Babylonian Empire into 120 pieces and appointed governors over each. Daniel chapter 6, verse 3. Then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to set him over the whole realm. So Daniel is being elevated. Now don't forget, Daniel was from Judah, from Jerusalem. Daniel was not of the Babylonian people, but yet he's set over them. Then the presidents and princes sought to find occasion against Daniel. They were jealous, right? Concerning the kingdom. But they could find none occasion nor fault, for as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. So they struggled to find something against him. In verse 5, then said these men, we shall not find any occasion against this Daniel, except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. We're going to trap him by his own God, by his adherence to the laws of God. So Daniel, by this time, was at least in his 80s and possibly in his 90s. Whew. I just struggle to get up here, and I'm not yet in my 80s. Daniel was a remarkable, remarkable man, but don't forget, he ate properly, as we found in chapter 1. He did not eat from the king's table. My problem, I think, is I eat too much from the king's table. So, an excellent spirit means that Daniel had a good attitude. Now, Darius was planning on making Daniel the chief ruler over all the other presidents and princes. This was intolerable to all the other leaders. Can you get that idea there? A jealousy is developing among all the leaders. This is our country, and yet you got this guy coming in from someplace else to lord it over us. So let's get him. So the favor Darius showed Daniel was a barrier to the ambitions of the princes and presidents. They were ambitious. Now the jealous leaders entered into a conspiracy to discredit and overthrow Daniel. Because of his God-fearing character, Daniel could not be corrupted. So the only fault that they might use against him pertained to his obedience to his own God. Would it be that the only accusation against you and I was that we were overzealous for our own God? If that's all they could find, think about it. Daniel chapter 6, verse 6, then these presidents and princes assembled together to the king and said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. And verse 7, all the presidents of the kingdoms, the governors and the princes, the counselors and the captains have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of any man or god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. This would appeal to Darius's ego, I think, big time. Oh, here we're gonna have the whole kingdom worshiping me, praying to me. So have you ever thought you would like to be king for a day? Huh? No? I remember there used to be a television show when I was much, much younger. You probably can't even remember it, most of you. Queen for a Day? You remember Queen for a Day. Okay, all right. The conspirators devised a plan in which no favors were to be asked for or prayers offered to any god or man other than King Darius for a period of 30 days. So it was only going to be a short time. It was going to be 30 days. But this was a big 30 days. Under this plan, King Darius would, in effect, be God for 30 days. For a modern-day application, notice what an Alabama judge did in 1997. And this is really interesting. The Alabama judge, Ira DeMent, ordered paid anti-religious monitors to enter classrooms and assemblies. He paid them to go in a rural Alabama school district. In a permanent injunction, this federal judge ordered a crackdown on any student observed discussing their faith or praying out loud, even quiet private voluntary prayers. Can you imagine? That was 1997. That was quite a while ago, but yet not so long ago. Has much changed since then? These judges pretty much do what they don't always get to continue in this, but they do get some action going with this kind of thing. And then he also ordered a crackdown on prayers traditionally given at graduation assemblies and by players and coaches before football games. This was an attack on your God and mine. He also ordered a crackdown on so-called religious harassment. This mandate has been interpreted by some frightened school officials as a ban on Christian students witnessing to others even at lunchtime, or Christian students wearing Jesus t-shirts and bracelets. Penalties will be severe. Daniel is about to enter into his own brand of civil disobedience. Now look, Daniel chapter 6, verse 8. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing that it be not changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. Now, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, and his windows being opened in his chamber toward Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime. Notice this. Notice this very carefully. When he knew that the writing was signed, when he knew that it became a decree and no one could overthrow that decree, he went into his house, he opened his chamber window towards Jerusalem, he kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime, meaning that he always did this. This was not something unusual. He just continued in the way that he normally went about his prayers. He refused to be compromised, and he was not afraid of the king. According to their laws, once signed by the king, the statutes became mandatory and could not be changed. The book of Esther establishes that these decrees could not be altered. And you see this in Esther. Esther chapter 1, verse 19. If it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it be not altered. If you make a decree, it's written down, it can't be altered. King can't alter it. Esther chapter 8, verse 8 says, write ye also for the Jews as it liketh you in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring, for the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring may no man reverse. So he wrote the decrees that could not be reversed. And it did not change the way Daniel honored his God. It is probable that Darius was prideful by the idea of deification, king for a day, as we say, and influenced in the thought that the act was a pledge of loyalty and respect for his authority. In Saudi Arabia, the practice of any religion besides Islam, in public or private, is punishable by imprisonment, torture, and sometimes death. For a Muslim to convert to another religion, the punishment is execution. Even though Daniel knew the consequences, he openly acknowledged and worshiped God. He was not fearful that what man could do to him. He was instead fearful and respectful of God. He simply could have ceased praying for 30 days, but he refused to compromise his integrity. This Kim Davis in Kentucky, she was willing to go to jail because she did not want to compromise her faith. And I believe that more opportunities is coming in this country. Rapidly. It was not that he prayed with windows open purposely in disobedience. Rather, he prayed as was his custom, even though he knew the consequences. Daniel could have simply closed his windows before praying, but even this simple solution would be a compromise of his values. He continued doing what he always did. He could have stopped praying. Kim Davis could have handed out these marriage licenses to these homosexual couples. She could have continued, or she could have done that. But that would compromise her faith. She refused to compromise. The Supreme Court has made it impossible for Christians to, by their conscience, to do what is required of them by their conscience for their God. Right? Furthermore, it is seen that Daniel's custom of praying 3 times a day, despite his busy schedule, should be a lesson for all of us busy people. Hello? Right? 3 times a day. And this guy was the governor of governors in Babylon. Damon Duck says that Christians are commanded to obey their government. However, civil disobedience may be acceptable and necessary when it interferes with the commandments and worship of God. The problem with our society is that we have compromised our values bit by bit. It's like the frog in a pot of water. We give here a little, there a little, and eventually we're killed by the boiling water. The small compromises have been so insignificant or cleverly disguised in many cases that most do not understand what is happening. The small twinge of conscience that we feel is overcome by the assurance that there is safety in numbers. Everybody's doing it, so why should I be any different? Right? Daniel prayed with windows open 3 times a day in civil disobedience. But he didn't change anything that he had already done. He didn't go out to do something different. Everyone is doing it, and I don't want to be different or left out, are among the many excuses that make it right in our own mind. Those of you who have had teenage children know these phrases. Everybody's doing it. Everybody's going to be there, so why can't I go? With Daniel, the difference was clear. There was no question that the attack was directed at his values and his God. The scriptures even say that's exactly what they were intending to do, to go after Daniel and his God, because they couldn't get Daniel any other way. Even his enemies were counting on his integrity to trip him up. Salt and light. Matthew chapter 5, verse 13, "Ye are the salt of the earth, but if the salt have lost its savor, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out and to be trodden under foot of men." Revelation chapter 3, verse 15, "I know thy works, and thou art neither cold nor hot. I would that thou wert cold or hot. So then, because thou art lukewarm and neither cold nor hot, I will spew thee out of my mouth." don't drink lukewarm coffee. It's either hot or cold. Drink it with ice or drink it hot. But be one or the other, not lukewarm. As we study this lesson of Daniel, something happened in our country. The Supreme Court redefined marriage to include gay couples. In doing so, it created an issue between church and state for individual conscience to obey God's laws or man's laws. I believe that the Scriptures are clear that we are to obey the law of the land insofar that it is not contrary to the law of God. One brave lady in Kentucky followed her conscience. Kim Davis. After the Supreme Court decision, Kim Davis began refusing to issue any licenses, either to same-sex or opposite-sex couples. She was jailed and released, but continues to refuse to issue marriage licenses under her name. She has petitioned that the state of Kentucky take legal actions to make exceptions for conscience in those cases. She does not want her name on the licenses. She still is standing up. She refuses to compromise. She refuses to personally issue these licenses, and she certainly does not want to sign the documents. There's one lady willing to stand up. And you can't blame it on the Republicans here. This lady was a Democrat. No, she changed, as I understand. She became a Republican shortly after this. But it's not a Republican-Democrat issue, really. Both of them are the problems. Both of them, Republicans and Democrats, are the problems. And I don't want to get too deeply down that rabbit trail, but you can read some of my newsletters. You might get an idea. Incompatible worldviews. The abolition of truth and morality. Now, I'm going to introduce you to a wonderful Christian man, Dr. Francis Schaeffer. He's written many books. A Christian philosopher, if you will, a theologian. And I'm going to quote a lot from him for the rest of this lesson. First of all, he says, the basic problem of the Christians in this country in the last 80 years or so in regard to society and in regard to government is that they have seen things in bits and pieces instead of totals. And I believe that one of the reasons that we see things in bits and pieces is, number one, we don't do our own homework. And number two, the news that we get only gives you bits and pieces of information. And a lot of times those are slanted for a particular outcome. He goes on to say they have very gradually, speaking of Christians, become disturbed over permissiveness, pornography, the public schools, the breakdown of the family, and finally abortion, but they have not seen this as a totality, each thing being a part, a symptom of a much larger problem. They have failed to see that all of this has come about due to a shift in worldview, that is, through a fundamental change in the overall way people think and view the world and life as a whole. You got to think about that a little bit, because you have been manipulated to think the way that you do. Be it in the schools, the media, the movies, whatever. These are opinion-forming avenues for you. These can change the way that you think. You're better to get your worldview out of the Bible rather than subscribe to these other methods. But the world today is subscribing to these other methods. Now, He goes on to say this shift has been away from a worldview that was at least vaguely Christian in people's memory, even if they were not individually Christian. So, many people in this country say they're Christian, but are they really Christian? Do they practice Christianity? Have they even read their Bible? They were Christian simply because they were born into it, many of them. Okay? So, in people's, other words, let me repeat this again. This shift has been away from a worldview that was at least vaguely Christian in people's memory, even if they were not individually Christian, towards something completely different, toward a worldview based upon the idea that the final reality is impersonal matter or energy shaped into its present form by an impersonal chance. He's talking about evolution here. They changed your mind on evolution, therefore they can infect you with the rest of it. And that's how they get you out of the Bible. Because the Bible is myth, so they say. He then says they have not seen this, that this world, he's speaking again of Christians, they have not seen that this worldview has taken the place of the one that had previously dominated Northern European culture, including the United States, which was at least Christian in memory, even if the individuals were not individually Christian. We have gone away from a Christian world view. Now, Dr. Schaeffer writes that the secular and Christian worldviews are incompatible. So you're living, if you have a Christian worldview and you're trying to live in a secular society, you're incompatible with that secular society. You can't just step over the line into the secular society and then step back. You have to, it's either fully Christian or it's not Christian at all. These two world views stand as totals in complete antithesis to each other in content and also in their natural results, including sociological and governmental results, and specifically including law. This is why this nation makes the laws that they do. Because they are no longer applying Christian principles to their laws. He then says, it is not that these two worldviews are different only in how they understand the nature of reality and existence. They also inevitably produce totally different results. So if you're going to apply a Christian worldview, you'll get one result. You'll get the Bible result. If you're going to apply a secular worldview, which I believe most of our lawyers are applying, lawmakers, I should say, are applying, and our government officials, whoever they are applying, I believe they're adhering to a secular worldview, and they're getting the results that we see, and we know that there's something wrong. Is that right? The operative word here is inevitably. It is not that they happen to bring forth different results, but it is absolutely inevitable that they will bring forth different results. Change is brought about in the nation by those in charge in accordance with the creation and promotion of the desired worldview. Notice that who brings about change? It is the people in charge that brings about the change in accordance with the creation and promotion of the desired worldviews. It's whatever worldview that they want to impose upon you, that is what they are doing, and that changes your mind and causes you to believe the lies. Once that worldview becomes dominant, then the change is complete. Obama's change was a worldview change. Remember when Obama says that he is going to, in other words, change? Everything was going to change. He was going to bring change. He was talking about a change of worldview. And I believe that's exactly what President Obama is bringing to his administration and to this country, is a change of worldview. Change is accomplished in the school system and the controlled media, newspapers, television, etc. Now, Christians are slow to understand. Dr. Schaeffer believes that Christians generally do not comprehend the incompatibility of these worldviews. Why have the Christians been so slow to understand this, he says? There are various reasons, but the central one is a defective view of Christianity. A defective view of Christianity. Christianity, pietism, made a sharp division between the spiritual and the material world, giving little or no importance to the material world. So we weren't paying attention to the material world. We'd spiritualized everything to the point where we were losing track of what was going on around us. The totality of human existence was not afforded a proper place. In particular, it neglected the intellectual dimension of Christianity. Christianity and spirituality were shut up to a small, isolated part of life. The totality of reality was ignored by the pietistic thinking. True spirituality covers all of reality. So many Christians do not mean what I mean when I say Christianity is true or truth. They are Christians and they believe in, let us say, the truth of creation, the truth of the virgin birth, the truth of Christ's miracles, Christ's substitutionary death, and His coming again. But they stop there with these and other individual truths. When I say Christianity, again, Dr. Schaeffer, when I say Christianity is true, I mean it is true to total reality. The total of what is, beginning with the central reality, the objective existence of the personal, infinite God. Christianity is not just a series of truth, but truth. Truth about all of reality and the holding of that truth intellectually, and then in some poor way living upon that truth. The truth of what is brings forth not only certain personal results, but also governmental and legal results. We have to live what the Bible says. The only way that we can make a difference in this world is to do what Jesus Christ said to do in the Scriptures. It's the only way you're going to make a difference. Absolutely the only way you're going to make a difference. That's what Dr. Schaeffer is saying. You cannot compromise your values, your Christian values. And this is what we're being asked to do in this country today, is to compromise our Christian values. Kim Davis was being asked to compromise her Christian values. And she stood, and she went to jail. And she's still in the fight. These pious Christians spiritualize their lives and allow the world and America to be taken over and controlled by humanistic believers. You want to live in the spiritual without even thinking about what is going on in the material? You might as well dress in a monk's garb and go out in the desert and erect a tent and stay there for all the good that it's going to do the world around you. Somehow they believe it is okay to ignore the secular elements of the world around them as long as they are spiritual in their own lives. Christians by the millions are uninformed as to the change in worldviews of their children through the arena of public education, the media, movies, music, and the use of symbols. Get educated. Educate yourself about what's going on in the world and how it applies to your Christian beliefs. Christians in particular should in fact be the most informed of all people. Generally, though, the Christians do not understand the nature and the motives of the forces arrayed against them. The main response of the uninformed Christian when exposed to the reality of the secular message is a universal rhetorical question: why is this important to me, or why do I need to know this? How many times have I heard those two statements? I've heard those statements when the question has been asked, why do I need to study prophecy? I've been teaching prophecy for many years, and I've heard this many times from various people who do not see the value of studying prophecy. The study of prophecy is treated the same way as this, I don't want to hear this, or it doesn't affect me or my family. It does affect you and your family. We're in the mess in this world that we're in because Christians have not stood up and followed the gospel message of Jesus Christ. And yet they call themselves Christians still. Opposed to the Christian point of view of reality or truth is the humanistic or materialistic. The humanists clearly understand the difference. The humanists understand their own message. The Christian does not, generally. I won't say everyone, but I'm saying generally, okay? Many Christians don't care or are caught up in materialism and enticed to compromise their values. You can't live in two worldviews. You can't do it. Those values are changed much the same way the frog stays in the pot of water while the heat is turned up. Compromise and sin become a pattern in one's life. We Christians have bought the Madison Avenue sales job. Our court system understands that we live in a secularized society, and therefore they can rule the way that they do because they can get away with it. Sociological law. According to Dr. Schaeffer, the secular worldview has crept into the law. We live in a secularized society, he says, and in secularized sociological law. By sociological law, we mean law that has no fixed base, but law in which a group of people decides what is sociologically good for society at the given moment, and what they arbitrarily decide becomes law. Oliver Wendell Holmes, Chief Justice or a Justice of the Supreme Court in 1841 to 1935, made totally clear that this was his position. Frederick Moore Vinson, 1890 to 1953, former Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, said, "Nothing is more certain in modern society than the principle that there are no absolutes. Those who hold this position themselves call it sociological law." Society tells you that there are no absolutes. That's why the Constitution, as written, can be changed at any moment, because it is considered by them not an absolute document. The words written in are not considered absolute. They can change the meaning of it as they see fit according to the prevailing culture of the time. Civil disobedience today. Our basic systems have been perverted and compromised. And most of us don't understand that it is based on a different worldview. What should the Christian do in this secular society? At some point, the Christian may be asked to choose between man's secular laws and the commandments of God, as Kim Davis found out. At some point, the Bible says mankind will have to choose between accepting a mark and worshiping Antichrist or following God's laws. This final compromise will be the end result of submitting to smaller compromises along the way. I'm following Christ. I don't want to hear this, and it doesn't affect me or my family. Daniel's act was an act of civil disobedience. He openly disobeyed the law of the legally constituted government in order to obey and to serve God. Listen to this carefully. He openly disobeyed the law of the legally constituted government in order to obey and to serve God. Francis Schaeffer believes that the time will come when Christians will be faced with the necessity of civil disobedience and the possibility of the use of force. He says, the 13 colonies concluded that the time had come and they disobeyed. We must understand that for the Founding Fathers, the bottom line was not an abstract point of conversation over a tea table. At a certain point, it had to be acted upon. The 13 colonies reached the bottom line. They acted in civil disobedience. That civil disobedience led to the open war in which men and women died, and that led to the founding of the United States of America. That was an act of civil disobedience. The Revolutionary War was an act of civil disobedience. There would have been no founding of the United States of America without the Founding Fathers' realization that there is a bottom line, and to them the basic bottom line was not pragmatic, it was one of principle. Please read most thoughtfully, what I'm going to say in the next sentence. This is still Francis Schaeffer speaking. He says, if there is no final place for civil disobedience, then the government has been made autonomous, and as such, it has been put in the place of the living God. If there is no final place for civil disobedience, then the government has been put in the place of the living God, because then you are to obey it even when it tells you in its own way at that time to worship Caesar. And that point is exactly where the early Christians performed their acts of civil disobedience, even when it cost them their lives. I'm talking about our brothers and sisters from the first century. They obeyed the laws of Caesar as long as Caesar's laws did not go against